6 months of widowhood had taught me that grief came in two forms: mine, which was private, and theirs, which demanded performance. I stood at my mining claim in the pre-dawn darkness, wearing canvas pants that had been Thomas's before they became mine. The metal tools were cold against my palms, and my breath came out in white clouds that disappeared into the Montana darkness. The earth smelled rich, like it always did before sunrise, back when the world still felt like it might offer possibilities instead of ultimatums. They'd wanted me fragile after Thomas died, remarriable, a proper widow in black wool who kept to her cabin and waited for some man to solve the problem of her existence. Instead, I'd become capable, learned to swing a pickaxe, to shore up tunnel walls, to read the claim maps Thomas had left behind. My hands developed calluses. My back grew strong. My patience for their opinions wore thin. The warnings had started small. Mrs. Henderson at the general store, her voice dripping with concern, thick as molasses. "It's not proper. Dear, a woman alone, dressed like that." Pastor Williams had come to my cabin with a Bible and worried eyes, suggesting I might find comfort in returning to my family back east. As if I had family. As if going backward ever solved anything. Then Sheriff Hutchins had visited 3 days ago, his badge catching the afternoon light like a threat. "You've been warned enough, Mrs. Barrett. Town Square, Thursday morning. Proper dress or face the consequences of public indecency." I looked at the black dress hanging in my cabin that morning, the one I'd worn to Thomas's funeral. Tight waist, impractical sleeves, heavy wool that would trap heat and slow movement. Then I looked at my pants, mended at the knees but functional, sensible. The claim didn't care about propriety, only competence. I'd learned to value the same. When did survival become scandalous? I touched both garments, feeling the texture of expectation versus the reality of work, Thomas used to say. They mean well. Sarah. His voice echoed in my memory, gentle and useless, meaning well isn't the same as doing right. I'd figured that out too late to save our marriage from the slow suffocation of his silence. I chose the pants, walking toward town at dawn. I counted 16 reasons to turn back. The sun rose behind me, painting my shadow long across the dirt road. I gave myself 17 reasons to keep walking. The 17th was simple. I was tired of shrinking, tired of apologizing for taking up space, tired of performing grief in a way that made other people comfortable. The town square appeared ahead, and I could see the wooden platform they'd built. 16 boards wide, I'd later count. I've always counted things when I'm nervous: boards, fence posts, the beats between heartbeats. But that morning, it just looked like a stage for someone else's judgment of my life. I kept walking. My legs wanted to turn back. But I'd learned the difference between what my body feared and what my soul required. This was required. The platform waited. So did they. Standing on that auction block, I held my head high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. The wood was rough under my hands when I climbed up. Morning sun hit my eyes, making me squint at the gathered crowd. I could smell coffee from the saloon, mixed with the scent of horses and judgment. Some faces looked gleeful, old man Carver, who'd always resented Thomas for beating his claim bid. Others looked uncomfortable, young Mary Watson, barely 20, her eyes wide with the terror of recognition. She saw her possible future standing where I stood. I counted the boards beneath my feet. 16. I'd remember that number. Count it when I couldn't count on anything else. Sheriff Hutchins cleared his throat, puffing up like a rooster. His speech about moral decay, and setting examples washed over me. I let my mind drift, focusing on individual words instead of his meaning. Indecency. As if survival was obscene. Impropriety. As if propriety fed anyone or kept them warm through mountain winters. Mrs. Henderson looked away when I caught her eye. Pastor Williams frowned at his boots. Young Mary kept staring, her hands twisted in her skirts. The bidding began. Old Man Carver called out first, not because he wanted me, but because humiliation was its own reward for men like him. Another voice joined, then another. They bid on me like I was livestock, proving whatever point they'd gathered to prove. The whole thing felt surreal, like watching myself from a distance, like this was happening to someone else. I held my head high, not pride, I had none left, defiance. They could take my freedom. They couldn't take my dignity. There was a difference, though I was only beginning to understand what it was. Then a tall man stepped forward from the back of the crowd. He was maybe late 30s, clean but work-worn, with the kind of face that suggested he spent more time with cattle than people. He didn't call out a bid. Instead, he spoke directly to Sheriff Hutchins, his voice carrying easily across the square. "Sheriff, I'm curious about the legal grounds here," Hutchins sputtered. Legal grounds. The woman was warned about public indecency, wearing work clothes on her own mining claim. Constitutes public indecency under which territorial statute. The man's tone was conversational, like he was genuinely curious rather than challenging. But everyone heard the challenge underneath. He cited property law, questioned the seizure of a citizen without due process, mentioned something about territorial versus federal jurisdiction. I didn't follow all of it. I just watched him look at Sheriff Hutchins like he was reading a badly written contract. Hutchins's face reddened. The crowd shifted. Uncertain. "I'll pay her fine directly," the man said. "As a loan to Mrs. Barrett, not as a bid in this auction. She can repay me on whatever terms we agree to." "That seems more legally sound than this proceeding." The sheriff's mouth opened and closed. He was trapped by his own pretense of legality, and everyone knew it. The man turned to me for the first time. His eyes were brown, steady, and they looked at my face, not at my figure in pants, not at my hair coming loose from its pins. My face. My eyes. "The loan's yours to repay. Mrs. Barrett, on your terms." I felt suspicion, confusion, relief, and fear collide in my chest. Men didn't help women without expecting something back. 26 years of living had taught me that much. But his eyes didn't travel, didn't assess, just waited for my answer. I'd prepared for humiliation. I hadn't prepared for rescue, if that's what this was. My father used to say, "Free lunch always costs more than you expect." I wondered what James Thornton I'd learn his name later would cost. I didn't thank him. Wasn't sure yet if I should. Just nodded once agreement without gratitude and climbed down from that platform. My legs shook. I blamed it on standing too long. Another lie I told myself that morning. 3 hours later, I sat in James Thornton's ranch office, insisting on written terms. I'd walked home first, considered running, then walked to his ranch instead. The office was neat, but lived in. Ledgers organized on shelves. A window overlooking corrals where horses moved in the afternoon sun. He offered coffee. I accepted, but didn't drink it. Just held the warm cup between my palms. The coffee was a test, not his mine. Could I accept something from him without feeling indebted? I wasn't sure yet. I want terms, I said. Written, legal. He didn't look surprised. Just pulled out paper and pen. Already prepared. That told me something, though I wasn't sure what. I'll work your ranch to repay the debt, I continued. Standard wages, no charity. Room and board are included in standard ranch hand compensation. He said, bunkhouse. I countered. With the other hands, not the main house. I'd been married young enough to know that help came with invisible strings. Proximity was one of them. He looked at me then. Really looked. Whatever makes you comfortable, Mrs. Barrett. He looked at my face when speaking. Not my figure, not my hair. My face. When had that stopped being normal? When had I started expecting men to look everywhere but at me? I read. Every line of the contract. He waited without complaint, without sighing, without those small masculine shows of impatience Thomas used to make when I took too long deciding things. The loan amount? The interest rate fair? I'd checked. The work terms? The repayment schedule. I signed Sarah Barrett. My own hand. My own terms. I'd owe him money. Not gratitude, I thought. Taking my copy, there's a difference. Money had numbers. Gratitude had expectations. The bunkhouse was simple. 3 other hands Martinez. Older, with knowing eyes. Young Tom. Quiet and watchful. Buck. Weathered as old leather. They nodded respectfully. Heard you stood up to Hutchins, Martinez said. That takes spine. But it was the first time in 6 months someone had seen me for an action instead of a scandal. I felt something loosen in my chest. I set up my space, simple bunk. Peg for my hat. A window facing east. I kept the contract under my pillow that first night. Thomas had proposed with flowers. James Thornton had proposed a business arrangement. I trusted the second more. I watched him walk back to the main house through my window. Waited for the catch. The condition. The expectation that would make this all make sense. It didn't come. That scared me more than if it had. That first night, I slept in my pants just in case I needed to run. By morning, I realized I'd slept through the night for the first time in 6 months. I wasn't sure if that meant safety or surrender. Probably both. I waited for the other shoe to drop. It took me 3 weeks to realize he'd thrown both shoes away. Work became my language again. Fence repair first. I'd always been good with my hands. The smell of creosote and freshly cut pine. The sound of the hammer finding its rhythm. The texture of rough wood wearing calluses into my palms that were already thick from mining work. This I understood. Work didn't care about propriety, only results. Every time James approached, I tensed, prepared for comments about my pants, my unconventional presence, my status as the woman the town had tried to auction. The comments never came. Instead, that corner post is solid. Would you show Martinez your technique? He saw my work. Not my scandal, not my defiance, my work. I'd prepared speeches. Defenses for why I wore what I wore. Why I worked like I worked. Why I refused to apologize for existing. He never asked for them. He asked instead if I preferred the morning or afternoon shift for irrigation. As if I were any other hand. As if that were normal. The strangeness of being treated normally felt more disorienting than being judged. I watched him with the other hands. He brought water to everyone during the heat of afternoon. asked about supply preferences. Did we want the grain order from Henderson's or ride to the next town? Thanked people by name for specific tasks. Martinez, that fence line is clean work. Tom, I noticed how you gentled that mare. Good patience. Then to me, Sarah, he'd started using my first name in the second week. And I'd been too surprised to object. Your mending technique on that harness saved us $20. Thank you. He saw competence as teachable skill, not lucky accident. The difference mattered. Boss is fair, Martinez told me one evening over dinner. We sat at the communal table, all of us covered in dust and honest exhaustion. Doesn't care who you were, cares who you are. How long you worked here, I asked. 3 years. Came from Texas with a past. He never asked about it, just asked if I could work cattle. Everyone here was rebuilding something. That felt significant. A few days later, I was mending fence in the afternoon heat. Shirt sleeves rolled to my elbows. When James approached, I tensed automatically, that old defensive instinct. He stopped a respectful distance away. You've got an efficient technique there, he said. Would you mind showing it to the others at dinner? We lose too much time on fence work. Not you work well for a woman, not surprising skill. Wasn't just acknowledgement that I had knowledge worth sharing. Sure, I said, trying to sound casual. That evening, I demonstrated my technique to Martinez and Tom while James watched. Buck asked questions. It was ordinary, painfully, beautifully ordinary. Later, at dinner, Martinez told a story about a stubborn mule in Texas. I laughed before I could stop myself, a real laugh. Not the polite sounds I'd made for the past year. I caught myself mid-laugh, looked up expecting everyone to be staring. James was smiling at Martinez's story. Not at me, specifically. Buck was grinning. Tom was trying not to laugh with his mouth full. I wasn't special. Wasn't watched differently. For the first time in months, I was just Sarah the fence mender, not Sarah the scandal. I'd spent 6 months as a problem to solve. 3 weeks here. I was just one of the crew. I'd forgotten my name could exist separate from my circumstances. When did I stop checking the horizon for escape routes? Somewhere between Tuesday's fence line and Friday's. Horseshoeing. I'd stopped planning to run. That night, lying in my bunk, I realized I'd stopped sleeping in my pants. Started wearing a nightshirt like any ranch hand after a long day. Small change. Significant surrender. The kind that meant I'd stopped waiting for the world to end. The hardest walls to maintain are the ones you build from grief. I woke knowing the date before remembering why it mattered. 1 year, 365 days since I'd stopped being a wife and became a problem. Since Thomas's heart gave out in the Northfield and mine kept beating out of spite. I worked too hard that day. Punishment or distraction, I couldn't tell the difference. As I mucked stalls, memories surfaced unbidden. Not the death, the complicated love before it. Thomas's laugh, rare but genuine. His kindness, quiet but real. His silence when Mrs. Henderson first criticized my work clothes. His gentle, they mean well. Sarah that never became, they're wrong. I'd loved him. He'd loved me, but he'd loved peace more than defending me. I'd forgiven him. Mostly. Except on days like today, I worked past dinner, past dark. My hands blistered. I didn't stop. Martinez checked on me once, saw my face, quietly left. I was grateful and resentful of his wisdom. James found me sitting on a hay bale in the barn at dusk. I wasn't crying, just hollow. He entered, saw me, and didn't ask questions, just sat on a nearby bale, not crowding, not leaving. The silence stretched. Horses shifted in their stalls. Hay smelled sweet. Light dimmed through the barn door. Finally, lost someone. I nodded. My husband. A year today. Pause. He was good to me, but he never... I stopped. James finished, stood up for you. I turned to look at him. Surprised? How did you... My mother wore pants to work our farm. Town scorned her. My father stood silent. His voice was quiet. Factual. I was 10 when I understood that silence was its own betrayal. That loving someone quietly doesn't help when they need someone loud. The connection settled between us, shared understanding that some people love you without defending you. That sometimes love isn't enough. "You're not working tomorrow," he said. "That's an order." He left before I could argue. Alone. I processed the gift he'd given me. Permission to grieve. No one had done that. Not the town. Not Thomas's family. Not even myself. I'd been too busy surviving to allow myself sadness. Why do we call it losing someone when they die? Thomas wasn't lost. He was gone. I was the one who'd been lost in his shadow. In town expectations. In trying to be small enough to fit their comfort. James's mother. The silence. Suddenly his respect made sense. Not despite my pants, but because of them. He'd watched his mother shrink. He wasn't going to ask me to. That night, I cried, and I didn't feel weak for it. Felt human. There's a difference I was only beginning to understand. The next day, I didn't work. Sat on the bunkhouse porch with coffee, watched the sunrise. Let myself remember Thomas the good and the complicated without guilt. James left me alone. But that evening, there was fresh bread on my bunk. No note, no expectation, just bread. Kindness without strings. I ate it slowly, tasting what I'd been too afraid to accept care. Real care, the kind that expected nothing back. The kind Thomas had tried to give, but hadn't known how to protect. Respect isn't declared. It's demonstrated when things fall apart. The storm built for 2 days. Late season weather turning dangerous. The kind that could destroy a year's work in hours. All hands moved cattle to shelter, secured buildings, gathered supplies. The wind picked up. Temperature dropped. Animals grew restless with that instinct they have for coming trouble. I worked alongside everyone, my competence fully visible. Crisis clarified things. Made what mattered obvious. The cattle didn't care about my pants. Neither did the storm. We were covered in mud, exhausted, focused. When the delegation arrived, Sheriff Hutchins, Pastor Williams, Mr. Henderson, they rode up as James was coordinating the last cattle move. All of us too tired for patience. "James, we need to speak with you." Hutchins said, "I'm managing a storm. Gentlemen, unless you're here to help move cattle, you're in my way. It's about Mrs. Barrett." The sheriff nodded toward me. "People are talking. A widow. Living on your ranch, it's improper." I watched James's jaw tighten. He was filthy, exhausted, and had no time for this. "Mrs. Barrett's employment is a private ranch matter," he said, voice level. We settled the legal question at the auction. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work." Pastor Williams stepped forward. "Surely you see how it looks." "James, the moral questions—" "I see a storm coming," James interrupted. "I see cattle that need moving. I see work that matters. What I don't see is how any of this is your business." He turned his back. Complete dismissal. I could have left then. Made it easier for him. Removed the problem they'd come to solve. Instead, I spoke up. "My presence here is legal. Sheriff, my clothing is practical. If the town has concerns, they can bring them to me directly, not interrupt a man's work during a crisis." My voice was steady. I'd let Thomas fight my battles with silence. I could fight my own with words. The delegation left, faces red, pride wounded. We worked through the night, all of us together. Moving as one unit, lightning illuminated the sky, turning everything stark and dramatic. At one point, James and I were moving the last group of cattle, both of us soaked and shaking with cold and adrenaline. He grinned at me through the rain. "You ride better than half my men." My response surprised me. I had a good teacher. I meant Thomas, who'd taught me to ride when we first married. But I was acknowledging James's respect, too. The way he'd made space for my competence. Dawn broke. We surveyed the damage, minimal. We'd saved almost everything. "We make a good team, Heffa," Martinez said to me, "boss lady." The hands saw me as leadership, not oddity, not scandal, not the woman who'd stood on an auction block, just someone who worked hard and knew what she was doing. The town had come to shame me. They'd left to an empty ranch because we had work to do. There was poetry in that ugly, satisfying poetry. That night, too exhausted to think, I fell asleep at the bunkhouse table, woke covered with a blanket that wasn't mine, James's coat. I realized later, he'd seen me sleeping and left it without waking me. Small kindness, enormous meaning. I folded it carefully, left it on his porch before dawn. Somehow, that felt like a conversation neither of us was ready to have out loud. Comfort is dangerous when you've spent a year building armor. The post-storm celebration was simple. Dinner with laughter. Martinez telling stories. Young Tom playing harmonica badly. Buck correcting him with rough affection. James poured coffee, our hands brushed. I felt the jolt. Electric. Terrifying. The kind of touch that meant something. I pulled back quickly. Saw he'd noticed. Saw he respected the distance. That night, alone in my bunk, internal panic set in. I stared at ceiling beams, counting them like I'd counted auction platform boards. 12 beams. 16 boards. Numbers were safe. Feelings were dangerous. I'd told myself this was temporary. Repayment. A debt with an end date. But somewhere between fence posts and sunrise coffee. Between storms and silence. I'd stopped counting days until freedom. Started counting days I'd been happy. The math terrified me. What if I disappeared into his life? Like I had into Thomas's. What if I stopped being Sarah Barrett and became James Thornton's woman? Another. Man's definition of me, I remembered my marriage in fragments. Thomas had loved me, but I'd been secondary. My choices needed his approval. My voice got quieter year by year. By the time he died, I barely recognized myself. I'd loved him, but I'd shrunk to fit his life. I'd promised myself never again. At 2 a.m, I packed my saddlebag. Everything I'd arrived with fit easily. I calculated the debt, left exact money and a written note. Planned dawn departure, maybe north to Montana. Find work. Start over. Again. Running felt safe. Staying felt like risking everything I'd built: the walls, the independence, the self I'd clawed back from grief and judgment. At 3, I couldn't sleep. Walked to the barn, found James there, mending tack by lamplight. He couldn't sleep either. He saw my packed bag. "You're leaving." Not a question. My defensive mechanisms activated automatically. Debt's mostly paid. "Time to move on." "Are you leaving because you want to?" he asked quietly. "Or because you're scared to stay?" The truth tumbled out before I could stop it. I don't know how to be myself and be with someone. He set down the leather he'd been working. "You've been yourself every day here. I don't want different." "You say that now." My voice cracked. Thomas said that too. Then it became, "Wear the dress to town," and "Don't upset the neighbors," and "Can't you just try to fit in?" I became smaller to make him comfortable. I won't do that again. "I'm not Thomas." "No." I looked at him directly. "You're better. That's what scares me." Silence. Then I continued, words spilling like water through a broken dam. With Thomas. I wore skirts to town even when it made no sense. I apologized for things that weren't wrong. I shrank myself so he could be comfortable. With you. I wear pants, and you notice my work. Not my defiance. You see what I do, not what I represent. That's... I stopped, struggling for words. That's terrifying. "I notice everything about you." "Sarah?" His voice was soft. "Not to change it. To appreciate it." He knew my name was Sarah. I'd been Mrs. Barrett so long. I'd forgotten I had a first name. That he used it felt significant. They say the devil you know is better than the one you don't. But I'd known the devil of shrinking. Didn't I deserve the risk of staying whole? I'd built walls to survive. James wasn't trying to scale them. He was waiting to be invited through the door. The difference paralyzed me. Fear came in 2 forms: fear of being hurt and fear of missing something real. Both felt the same in the dark. I didn't unpack that night, but I didn't leave either. Sat on the bunkhouse steps until sunrise, watching the sky change from black to purple to pink to gold. Learning the difference between being alone and being free. Alone was safe. Free was terrifying. For the first time in my life, I wanted terrifying more than I wanted safe. The bravest thing I ever did was stay when leaving felt safer. I returned the packed saddlebag to storage at dawn. Unpacked each item: deliberately shirts, spare pants, the tin cup Thomas had given me. The contract now fulfilled, placed them back on shelves, reclaimed space. Leaving was easy. I'd done it before, left the cabin, left the claim, left the version of me that apologized for existing. Staying required something I'd never had faith that I could be loved without shrinking. I found James at breakfast in the main house. He sat at the table with coffee in hand, looking like he hadn't slept. I entered. First time I'd walked into his house uninvited. He looked up, saw me, waited. Didn't ask. Didn't push. Morning light came through windows, illuminating dust motes in the air, the smell of fresh coffee, the space between us, both physical and emotional. If I stay, I started, stopped, started again. If I'm staying, things have to change. He nodded, listening, not interrupting, not defending, not negotiating, just listening in a way Thomas never had. I keep working. I keep the pants. I keep my own space until I choose different. Not until you want different, until I choose. I took a breath. I need someone who loves what I am, not what I could be for him. I fell for the woman who stood on that auction block and refused to break. He said, "That's who I want. Today, tomorrow, 20 years from now, pants and all. Even when I'm difficult, I challenged. When I'm stubborn. When I choose work over social calls. When I embarrass you in front of the town." He laughed. Actually, laughed. Especially then. "Sarah, you think your strength is a flaw? It's why I fell in love with you." I froze. Love. He'd said it like it was simple, like loving me complicated, stubborn, scandal-wrapped. Me was easy. I'd expected negotiations, conditions. Instead, he offered acceptance. The difference between being loved and being accepted, they should be the same, but rarely are. I moved my coffee mug to sit beside his at the table. Small gesture. Enormous meaning. From separate to together. 6 inches that meant everything. He saw it. His smile was small. Real. We sat in silence. Drinking coffee. The morning growing brighter around us. It wasn't a declaration. It was better. It was a beginning. That day, we worked side by side. Conversation flowed easier. I asked his opinion on fence placement. He asked mine on herd management, partnership, not hierarchy. Martinez noticed, grinned, said nothing. His silence was approving. Evening came. James invited me to the porch after dinner. I accepted. We sat watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that had no names, just beauty. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "Be 2 separate people who choose each other. We figure it out." He said, "Together. Together." I'd been alone so long. The word felt foreign, but his hand was right there, resting on the porch railing. I reached for it. My choice. My timing. My hand trembled not from fear, but from courage. Choosing someone, choosing vulnerability, choosing to risk being loved while staying whole, that took every ounce of strength I'd built on that auction. Block. In that mining claim. In every moment, I'd refused to break. I'd faced down a sheriff. This terrified me more. I laced my fingers through his. This I can do. He squeezed gently. We sat like that as the sun set completely, stars emerging one by one overhead. I'd spent a year defending my right to exist. That evening, I claimed my right to be happy. The difference was everything. Thomas had loved me. James saw me. There's a universe between the two. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing despite it. I was terrified. I chose anyway. That night, walking back to the bunkhouse, my space, my choice. But with his hand still warm in my memory, I realized something I'd been so afraid of losing myself in love that I'd forgotten love could be the place I found myself. The real version. The one who wore pants and built fences and refused to break. She was worth loving. Finally. I believed it. Love isn't about changing for someone. It's about choosing someone who wouldn't ask you to. 6 months later, I sat at my desk in the ranch office, not James's. Mine teaching a young widow named Mary Watson how to manage accounts. She'd come seeking advice, eyes full of the same fear I'd carried. "How did you do it?" she asked. "Stand up to them." I thought about the auction platform. That platform was 16 boards wide. Now it's just wood in someone's shed. But what I learned there built everything I have. My life now looked nothing like my life then. Co-managing the ranch, legal partnership papers signed, my name on deeds alongside his. Still in pants that hadn't changed. Every morning, 2 coffee mugs on the porch where I'd moved 3 months ago. On my timeline. When I was ready, my books on his shelves, his tools in my workspace. Shared decisions about everything that mattered. The town had shifted. Not approval they'd probably never approve, but respect, grudging and real. Sheriff Hutchins nodded to me on the street. Mrs. Henderson took my supply orders without comment. Pastor Williams had preached a sermon about judging others. Small victories. Change came slowly. Not through grand speeches, through consistency, through refusing to shrink, through being undeniably good at what I did. Later that afternoon, James and I reviewed ranch records together. He asked my opinion on a major purchase decision. I gave it. He took it. The exchange was quick, equal, natural. This is what partnership looks like. I thought, not him asking permission to lead, or me begging to be heard. Just 2 competent people navigating together. I told Mary before she left, dignity isn't performed, it's lived. Every day you choose to be yourself honestly, fully you reclaim it. People will be uncomfortable. Let them. Their discomfort isn't your responsibility. Your authenticity is. And love, she asked. And can you have both yourself and someone else? Only if he loves yourself, not who he imagines you could be. Wait for that man. He's worth waiting for. After she rode away, I stood on the porch, looking at the life I'd built. Work clothes on the hook. Partnership contracts in the safe. 2 coffee mugs. The view from this porch that I now called home. I'd feared that love meant loss of self. Instead, I found that real love meant being fully seen. Thomas had loved me quietly. James loved me loudly, not through declarations, but through respect, through standing beside me when the town came, through never once asking me to be different. 6 months married to James, small ceremony, Martinez officiated, no town drama. 6 months of being called partner instead of wife. The word mattered. It meant equal. It meant chosen. It meant I hadn't lost myself, I'd found us. Every morning, I still chose the pants. Every morning, James noticed my work. Some things were worth keeping consistent. Happiness isn't the absence of struggle. It's the presence of someone who respects your strength instead of asking you to hide it. That evening, at sunset, both of us in work clothes, we reviewed the day's accomplishments. I mentioned the fence line needed attention. He suggested we tackle it tomorrow together. Together sounds good, I said, and meant it with every piece of my formerly guarded heart. I watched the horizon where Mary had disappeared on her horse. I'd been her once, standing alone, unsure if strength was allowed. Now I knew strength isn't just allowed, it's the foundation of everything real. And when you build from that foundation, what you create actually lasts. The lesson that freed me defending your right to exist authentically, even when society disagrees, attracts those worth keeping in your life. True dignity comes from staying true to yourself, not conforming to others' comfort. That night, I wore my pants to dinner, my pants, my choice, my life. And the man across the table smiled at me like I'd hung the moon, not despite who I was, but because of it. I smiled back, because of him, because of us, because I'd learned the greatest truth. You don't have to shrink to be loved. You just have to find someone who loves you vast.